Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Singh, and I'm the founder of Publication Academy, your online training partner for higher ed career advancement and professional development. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for this installment of our Career Pathway series, Exiting Academia. Today, we have a fascinating interview with Dr. Chiara Giovanni, who successfully transitioned from completing a PhD in comparative literature into the exciting industry vertical of business consulting. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Over now to our amazing Publication Academy interviewer, Dr. Gertrude Nantra.
Hello everyone, Dr. G. Nantra here, and I'm once again excited to have a guest with us. Today we're interviewing Dr. Chiara Giovanni from New York City on her own career transition. So welcome, Dr. Giovanni.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to chat with you. So let's start with you describing your educational background and why you chose to pursue a career outside of the academy.
Sure. So I'm from the UK. I grew up there, I was born there, and I did an undergraduate degree in modern languages, specifically German and Spanish, at the University of Oxford. I stayed there for a master's degree focusing on Spanish literature, and then I moved to California in 2017, where I did a PhD in comparative literature with a minor in anthropology at Stanford University. To your question about why I considered a career outside of academia, I would say there were two main things that I thought about. One was kind of like the security, stability perspective. I was a little nervous about the amount of uncertainty that an academic career offered me. I was in a relationship with another academic at the time. I'm from a first generation low income family, and I just wanted to be able to have a little bit more control over what my life after my PhD would look like. I wanted to know that I could stay in the US if that was important to me. I wanted to be able to choose the place that I lived. I wanted to know how much money I would make and have the job security that I would be able to get another job after that if possible. So the security, stability part was the first reason. But the second reason is curiosity. And I think curiosity is what shapes a lot of us who go into academia initially. We're curious about the world. We're curious about the way that people think about things, about new ideas. And why not be curious about what's happening outside of your own field of research and outside of the university? I think the university has a very specific way of fostering intellectual dialogue and making decisions and shaping lives. There are also tons of institutions outside of universities that do the same thing. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about the world and the way that it runs and the way that big decisions are being made today that wasn't necessarily going to take place within, the four walls of my office where I was writing a book. And that curiosity is the second reason that pushed me to explore a career outside of academia.
Very, 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 very valid reasons. Thank you for sharing those reasons. I love what you talked about when you talk about stability. And I find that for a lot of academics, especially for academics in the arts and humanities, I find that sometimes, especially depending on your dissertation topic, it's so niche that you can only work at certain places even within the vast United States, right? And so having that stability and flexibility, I love that you mentioned that. Now, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now and what a day today looks like in your life.
Sure. I'm a management consultant at the company Bain and Company, and they have offices all over the world, but I'm at their office in New York, and I've been with Bain for about a year. I think before I tell you what a day looks like, I'll just answer the question that a lot of people ask, which is like, what is consulting and what do consultants actually do? And the way that I like to think about it is sort of like therapy, but for businesses.
Right.
If you're asking, let's say like, do I break up with my boyfriend, or do I go to graduate school, or do I move countries? You're probably not going to make the decision by yourself, right? You're probably going to do some research. Maybe you'll ask your family, maybe you'll ask your friends, you'll ask people around you who you trust to help you make that decision, because all good decisions are made in community. And that's sort of what we do, but for business decisions. What that looks like on a day-to-day basis is we do all of our work in teams that are almost like little labs where you sort of have like the people running it at the top who make those big high-level decisions about what happens next. And then you have the more junior working team who are doing the research and analyzing the data to figure out what those decisions should look like in practice. And that's, what I do. And so a typical day will look like going into the office, meeting with my team, maybe 9 or 10 in the morning, laying out what we want to get done over the course of the day, hearing about any client meetings that are going to be happening, any other contacts that we might need. Then after that, I talk to my supervisor briefly and we say, okay, like here's the plan for the next couple of hours. I go away, I do some of that work. Maybe I'm reading the news to find out about legislation changes that are going to impact the work that we're doing. Maybe I'm on the phone to experts in the field to ask them how they think about this. I'm, documenting all of this and making slides to kind of communicate. It's sort of like writing a paper in a way where we're communicating what we're finding. I might have some, meetings where I have lunch with my friends, or I might meet with a professional mentor over coffee to just chat about how things are going in my career. It's a very supportive environment and you're not having to make any big moves alone. And then towards the end of the day, I'll reconnect with my team. We'll check in about progress. We'll say, okay, here's what went well. Here's where we're still not sure. We had a meeting with a client, some new questions have come up, and then we'll work out what we're doing for the rest of the day. And then I'll go back and, do some more work, maybe with my supervisor, maybe by myself. So that's what a typical day looks like. And we are focused on getting our output, our deliverables to the client as quickly as possible, rather than iterating over something for weeks or months or even years. We try to communicate with the client on a daily or weekly basis to let them know how they should be thinking about the big questions that they're facing.
Wow. Thank you for describing that, because I think that's definitely one of the challenges. When I was coming up and I was beginning to think about careers, and people would say they're consultants, and like, consulting on what exactly? But
Yeah.
thank you for explaining it. I love how you said we're like therapists for businesses. That was great, and thank you for describing what a typical day in a life looks like. So, I think one of the challenges that people always have is, we're working for Bain and Company, and that is a big company. That is a very reputable company, and sometimes people begin to talk. I know that somebody watching this already talked themselves out of, I don't think I can do that. So let's talk about how you found this job. What was the interview process like? What was the job search process like? And how did you end up at this very big company?
The good thing about big management companies like Bain, BCG, and McKinsey is that they have dedicated hiring tracks for PhDs that run on a specific cycle, a lot like the academic job cycle where you're applying at specific points in the year. It's a very well laid out and well documented process. So you're not just sending a resume in at a random point in the year and hoping for the best. And what it looks like is you start to kind of get involved with the firm, especially if you're finishing your PhD or you're in a postdoc, you'll be connected with them through your university. You'll hear a little bit about what people do on a day-to-day basis. You'll get the chance to ask questions and decide whether it's a good environment for you. Then you submit your application, which is, a resume, maybe a cover letter, and the interviews take the form of case interviews where you're kind of solving a business problem with the interviewer in real time. Then you'll either get a full-time interview, or if it's internship season, you'll get an internship, and then you'll get an offer for a full-time job after that. All in all, the process was very quick, and I went from submitting my application to signing a full-time job offer in the space of a couple of months. And I found out about this because Stanford has a very robust, advanced degree consulting club that really facilitates a lot of these conversations with recruiters and with these companies. I didn't know anything about consulting when I started. I had never done a case interview. I didn't read business news. I could barely calculate, the tip on a restaurant bill at the end of a meal. I was definitely not gunning for this my entire academic career, but I think it's enough to be curious and to be interested about the work that people are doing and to understand almost like the theory and the frameworks behind the way that people solve business problems. It's not so different from understanding the theory and the framework behind the way that people understand gender or existence. It's just a different kind of curiosity. And so it was just basically fueled by conversations with people, with interviews, and I did a week-long internship at the office in New York, and then I landed the job. And what I always say to PhDs who are thinking about consulting, especially those in the humanities, is it looks very polished on the surface, but everybody starts in the same position where they don't know how to do the job. Whether you've come from being an MBA, or whether you've come from doing a PhD or a JD or an MD, you're all in the same boat. And the great thing about big companies like this is that they're training you from the ground up, from the moment that you walk into the office. You're not expected to retrain yourself in your spare time or read a ton of business books. They're just looking for people who can think on their feet and explain in a logical and informed way why they're making the decisions that they're doing. And I think that should be enough, hopefully, to encourage PhDs who are watching this and considering consulting to investigate it as a career path that might be applicable to them.
Right. So many good gems you dropped, and I want to tease them apart a little bit. So
Sure.
the first one was you were involved in a management consulting club at Stanford. So that was helpful. In that club, were there specific things you were learning? Were you learning how to do case interviews? Were you
Yes.
like, okay, what kinds of things were you learning in that organization?
The club was great. They do, and a lot of institutions have them. They did year-round programming, but I missed the first few months because I came into this quite late. But I think that the first third of the year they spend on like what is consulting, what is a business, and how does a business work? What is profit? What is revenue? What are different kinds of costs? Just really laying the groundwork. Then
Yes.
at the beginning of the calendar year, they start talking to you about like what the application process actually looks like, what a good resume looks like, what a good cover letter looks like, all of those things that you take for granted when, bless you, when you
Thank
are
you.
when you're coming from an academic setting where you have a very specific way of doing things.
Yeah.
And then you spend months on the case interview, understanding the structure of it, like the different ways that you'd approach, like the math portion, for example, that you'd approach the structuring portion. And then you have opportunities to kind of like watch people demonstrating it in real time, ask any questions, and then you're out and interviewing in real time. I think the other good thing about the consulting club is that it connects you with other people who are interested in consulting jobs. And one of the big things that you need for the interviews is you need to practice. And you can't practice unless you're practicing with other people. And so this club connects people who are also hoping to practice, and then you kind of get some like good rounds of iterating on the interview style with each other. And I made some really good lifelong friends from that, which was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. What I'm getting from this is it's helpful, and people should seek out these types of clubs because you derive a lot of benefit. So the club, and then you decided to apply. Did you just put out one application? Did you apply to multiple consulting firms?
I applied to two of the big consulting firms. So I applied to Bain and BCG. And I also applied to a smaller healthcare specialized boutique consulting firms. And that's the other thing that I think PhDs might want to consider is there are the kind of general consulting firms, but then there are more specialized consulting firms on things like healthcare, life sciences, social good, social impact, education, technology. And even though I don't have a background in life sciences at all, I could tell that the company that were kind of visiting Stanford to give a talk about hiring were just interested in people who were willing to learn and who were curious. And even though they typically hire people from MD programs, from, let's say neuroscience PhD programs, I still impressed them enough to be given an internship offer despite coming from a comparative literature background. So at the end, I had the full-time offer from Bain, and then I had the internship offer from the life sciences consulting company, which I ended up turning down because I already had the full-time offer from Bain.
Yes. Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful. And then, of course, you talked about how the application process went from you started the application process, and within a few months, you had the offer. Did you have to go through multiple rounds of interviews? Of course, yes. But if so, can you give us like a general overview? Did you have to go through 5 rounds of interview, 3 rounds of interview? What was that like?
What I really appreciated about the Bain process is that it was pretty quick. I went through a round of interviews that were just 2 back-to-back case interviews with partners at Bain over Zoom. And then I flew to New York for a week-long internship specifically designed for people coming out of PhDs who didn't necessarily have a lot of experience with consulting. And what those 5 days look like is you spend a day in training, you spend 3 to 4 days with a real case team working on real Bain work, and then you take what you've done with that team and you turn it into a final presentation that you give to the hiring team. You fly back, and then within a couple of days, they call you and they tell you yes or no. And so it was really just 1 round of interviews and then a quick internship that was a really, really fun week and gave me like a real immersive sense of what it would actually look like to be a consultant. I think something that I used to think about a lot when I was helping to teach life design at Stanford was the importance of prototyping. Like, how can you experience what it's going to be like before making this big commitment? And this internship was a great way of doing that, but it was very quick. It was not a punishing 8-round interview process at all.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Because I think that that's the other thing that restricts people is they think in order to get into the bigger companies, they need to go through all these multiple rounds of interviews. So this is actually very, very helpful. Thanks for sharing with us, Kiara. So let's move on. And at this point, I just want to ask you, what transferable skills from your degree in comparative literature and okay, I'll talk about this later, but one of my biggest beliefs is that when you got a PhD, you didn't just get a PhD in the subject you got a PhD in. You also picked up so many skills that sometimes we overlook. But that's a topic for a whole other day. But let's talk about you specifically and the transferable skills that you think were important to you landing the job and which you use on a daily basis.
I think it's a good question. I know that the concept of transferable skills can be controversial. It can feel like a little vague. It can feel a little ambiguous. I think the 3 biggest things that I took with me from my PhD into my job are the curiosity, which I've already mentioned. When you're working, this many hours and dedicating yourself to a client problem, you need to care about it so much. You need to be like possessed by how important it is to find the answer. Like, I'm working on a really cool project right now that involves helping an energy company work out if selling into the data center market is right for them, as data centers are struggling to work out how they're going to get enough power to, make sure that their AI model data centers continue to run, and they can't get electricity from the grid anymore. And so, like, are they going to buy gas turbines? Are they going to buy solar panels? Like that kind of thing. And it needs to kind of just like fill your body and consume you if you're like, well, what are these data centers doing, for example? And it's like a skill, yes, but it's also a disposition. And I think that ability to just become like obsessed with what you're doing is something that a lot of PhDs have that I think can be very helpful in this type of job that is so problem driven. The second is related, which is the ability to chase down a research rabbit hole until you find the end. And you have to do that very quickly in a job like this. You can't spend weeks sifting through the literature. But if you're trying to figure out, let's say, like, how big are gas turbines and how much space are they going to take up in a data center, and you can't find that information easily on the internet, What a PhD is going to do that other people might not is pull out all of the stops to like figure out how to get that information. Are you trolling Reddit forums? Are you reading news articles from 10 years ago? Are you deep in like applications for permits that are like buried on a corner of the DOE website? Like whatever it is, you're going to leave no stone unturned until you have found the answer to that problem. And that tenaciousness, that tenacity, that determination is something that I think that PhDs could do well to bring with them from academia into their next job.
Right.
And lastly, this is one that I think gets talked about a lot, but not necessarily with specific examples, but I think being able to see the bigger picture. Yes, you need to go down into your rabbit holes, but I think a good academic is able to come out from that tunnel and see how the niche that they're working on connects to the broader picture of their field or the question or the way that that problem is changing in society. And that's exactly what you need to do as a consultant. You can't just be focused on, okay, well, to use this example, like how many inches wide is this gas turbine? It's the ability to pop up and say, okay, but what does that mean? Like, does that mean that certain data centers are not going to buy these gas turbines because they're just too big and they're going to take up too much space? Okay, what does that mean for our client? And that ability to connect depth with breadth is the third thing that I would say that PhDs can really bring with them from their academic experience into their future job.
Yeah. Thank you. So brilliant. Thank you so much. I loved how you talked about the tenacity, because a lot of us have had to be, to have a lot of tenacity and resilience in our PhD program. So
Yes.
bringing some of that into your work life is a really good point. And I love how you also talked about leaving no stone unturned and just chasing things down. I'm actually working on a project like that right now where, if you go on the FDA's website, some of that information is actually redacted from documents. Yes. Yes, exactly. And so I'm like, oh, how am I going to find this information if the information is redacted from documents on the FDA's website, right? Because that's the ultimate place you would go and find it. So being able to still chase that down and find that information is such a really good, it's really good that you described that. Let's talk about that. What was the hardest part about, or was anything hard about your decision to leave academia?
It's a good question. I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about one thing that's to do with the kind of the job itself. I'm going to talk about one thing that's to do with like my life and how that's shaped. I'm going to talk about one emotional thing. So the thing that was kind of tough to adjust to with the job is just speed to output. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't have days or weeks or months to spend digging into a problem. You maybe have an hour to dig into the information that you have, the data that you have, come up with a hypothesis, put it on a page and get it to your supervisor to have it looked at, because you need to move fast. And I think I feel like I've got a handle on it now, but one of the biggest things that I was working on during my first year as a consultant was just moving from idea to output fast. I think something that I'm very used to as an academic is coming in with an idea to a meeting and then talking about it, but not necessarily having anything on a page to show, and moving from that idea phase to putting something out, even if it's wrong, even if it's incomplete, was something that I needed to work on and was a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah.
The second thing in terms of just my day-to-day life and the structure of it is the incredible freedom that I had as a graduate student in the humanities to work whenever I wanted or not work whenever I wanted. I could go to the grocery store in the middle of the day. I could go to a workout class in the middle of the day. If I wanted to write at night, if I wanted to write at 6 a.m., like I could make my own decisions about that. And the first few months of transitioning to a much more normalized corporate, you get in at 9 a.m. every day and then you work until you're done every day. And that can be anywhere from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., depending on your case and depending on the work that you have to do. And needing to plan my social life and my exercise and my housework around work was I think a little bit of an adjustment at the start. And then the last thing I would say is I didn't get any I didn't get too many sort of like negative comments from friends who remained in academia, but I did notice that among some of my friends there was a lot less interest and curiosity in my work life. Friends who kind of went from asking every day, every week, like, what are you writing about? What are you reading? What are you thinking about? To like, oh, well, Kiara has kind of one of those like difficult to understand corporate jobs. I don't really know what she does all day, so I'm not going to ask. Having that sensation of my professional life feeling like it was less of priority to some of my friends was a little bit of an adjustment as well, until I made more friends and who were very interested in what I was doing with my life. I didn't take it personally, but it was a little bit of an adjustment for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that because I think everybody will go through something, and so thank you for sharing that. As we come, this has been such a great conversation, by the way, and so thank you for sharing all your knowledge. As we come to the end of this conversation, is there a last bit of advice you would give to somebody that maybe is in the humanities watching this right now and they want to work in management consulting, they want to take the same path as you? What last piece of advice would you give to that person?
Somebody who's in the humanities and already knows that they want to be in management consulting, I would say two things. I would say do it. The world is so big and you will learn so much and you will just be amazed at your own capacity to learn things that you never thought were possible for you to be engaged with, like business and finance and economics. Like you will just be amazed at the capacity of your own mind to expand. And then I would say, don't like abandon your identity as a writer and a scholar and a teacher and a reader, but don't get so attached to that you have a hard time letting go either. People will really value you for your background because it's interesting and it's unusual and it's different, but it's okay to also close that chapter and say, like, that was my background and now I'm being present with you in the world of business, in the corporate world, solving these problems together. I think something about a lot of academics is we either just pretend that everything we did in our PhDs like never happened and it was like an alter ego that we don't want to be associated with anymore, or we're kind of like still so overly attached and we still bring that kind of like scholarly presence into every new setting. And I think being able to find like a happy medium there to embrace the new life that you have, but with all of the background and the history that has made you the incredible person that you are, is the best piece of advice I can think of going forward.
Thank you so much. Wise words. Thank you so much, Dr. Giovanni. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.